There are moments in history that feel distant not because of time, but because of how differently people lived, thought, and accepted risk. The 1970s was one of those moments, a decade suspended between innocence and awareness, freedom and consequence, tradition and change. Welcome back to Memory Media Lane, where today we open the door to an era that now feels almost unreal. The 1970s were colorful, expressive, and filled with optimism. Society trusted people more than rules. Parents trusted instincts over manuals. Governments often acted only after tragedy struck. And as a result, many everyday activities that once felt harmless, routine, or even joyful are now considered dangerous, irresponsible, or outright illegal. This is not a story meant to shame the past. It is a story meant to understand it. So sit back and join us as we explore 20 things that were once a normal part of daily life in the 1970s, but today are banned, restricted, or considered extremely unsafe. In the 1970s, train tracks ran openly through neighborhoods, towns, and cities, often unfenced, unguarded, and unquestioned. To children, they were not symbols of danger. They were paths, shortcuts, and playgrounds rolled into one. Kids walked along the rails, arms stretched out for balance, pretending the steel lines were tightropes suspended over imaginary dangers. Others hopped from sleeper to sleeper, daring each other to cross faster. Some placed pennies on the tracks, waiting eagerly for the next train to pass so they could collect flattened souvenirs, warm from the sun and vibrating rails. Parents rarely interfered. Rail safety campaigns were minimal, and trains were loud enough that most people believed danger could be heard coming. The assumption was simple: children would move when necessary. What was not widely understood at the time was how unpredictable trains could be, how long it took for them to stop, and how devastating even a single misstep could become. Today, that same behavior would trigger alarms, fines, and criminal charges. Modern trains are faster, quieter, and heavier, requiring enormous distances to brake. Railway companies enforce strict trespassing laws, and public safety campaigns repeatedly warn that entering track areas without authorization can be fatal. What was once a childhood adventure is now a life-threatening crime. Few toys represent 1,970 seconds childhood risk-taking better than clackers. At first glance, they were simple, two hard acrylic balls connected by a string, but in motion, they became unpredictable weapons. The goal was to swing them rhythmically so they smashed together repeatedly, creating a sharp, echoing sound that filled schoolyards and sidewalks. Children competed for speed and endurance, pushing the toy further and further. Bruised hands were expected. Being hit in the face was considered bad luck rather than a design flaw. In some cases, the acrylic balls shattered entirely, sending sharp fragments flying toward nearby children. At the time, this wasn't considered negligence. It was considered character building. As reports of injuries increased, schools and public spaces began banning clackers. Eventually, manufacturers were pressured to redesign them using softer materials and safer mechanisms. Today, clackers are remembered less as toys and more as symbols of how casually danger once blended into playtime. Backyard games in the 1970s often involved metal, sharp edges, and very little supervision. Lawn darts were perhaps the most extreme example. The game involved tossing large, heavy darts with sharp metal tips high into the air, aiming for plastic rings placed on the grass. The thrill came from watching the dart arc through the sky and hearing it strike the ground with a heavy thud. But those same darts could, and did, penetrate skulls, organs, and bodies. Children wandered into playing areas. A single bad throw could change lives forever. Tragic accidents accumulated, some fatal, until public outrage forced government action. By the late 1980s, sharp-tipped lawn darts were banned entirely. Today's versions are redesigned with rounded tips and lighter materials, stripped of the danger that once made them infamous. The Easy Bake Oven promised independence. It allowed children to bake their own food, to create something tangible with their hands, and to feel proud of the result. Powered by a simple incandescent light bulb, the oven slowly cooked tiny cakes and cookies. Children would stare through the opening, waiting patiently as the batter transformed into something edible. What many parents didn't realize was that the light bulb could reach temperatures exceeding 175 degrees Celsius. Curious fingers slipped inside, Skin met metal. Burns followed. Reports of injuries mounted, including second-degree burns. Eventually, the design was changed, replacing exposed bulbs with safer heating elements. Looking back, it feels shocking that a toy like this existed, yet for many, it remains one of the most cherished memories of childhood. In the 1970s, smoking was deeply woven into everyday life. It appeared in films, television shows, advertisements, restaurants, offices, and homes. So when children walked into stores to buy cigarettes for their parents, no one questioned it. Sometimes they carried handwritten notes. Sometimes they didn't need proof at all. Cigarette vending machines stood openly in restaurants and public spaces, accessible to anyone with spare change. Today, such scenes feel impossible. Strict age restrictions, ID checks, advertising bans, and public smoking laws reflect how dramatically attitudes toward tobacco have shifted. This transformation represents one of the greatest public health victories of modern times. Perhaps one of the most shocking realities of the 1970s was the existence of smoking areas within high schools. Students gathered between classes, cigarettes in hand, while teachers smoked nearby. The air was thick, hazy, and unquestioned. As awareness of second-hand smoke grew, these areas vanished. By the 1990s, the idea of smoking on school grounds became not only illegal, but socially unacceptable. It was a clear signal that society had begun prioritizing long-term health over cultural habit. Television once glamorized smoking with powerful imagery. Cowboys rode horses through open landscapes. Celebrities smoked effortlessly. Cigarettes were presented as symbols of confidence, masculinity, and success. But science caught up with advertising. As studies linked smoking to cancer, heart disease, and respiratory illness, public pressure mounted. In 1971, cigarette advertising on television and radio was banned in the United States. The tobacco industry adapted, but the cultural shift had begun. Media would never promote cigarettes the same way again. Flying in the 1970s meant sharing a confined space filled with cigarette smoke. Ashtrays were built into armrests. Smoking sections existed only in theory. Smoke drifted freely through the cabin. As evidence of second-hand smoke dangers increased, regulations tightened. By the year 2000, smoking was banned on all US flights. The air became cleaner, the experience healthier, and a once common practice disappeared entirely. In the 1970s, seat belts were often considered optional. Some drivers believed they were dangerous. Many cars lacked rear seat belts entirely. Children stood on seats, sat on laps, or moved freely as cars traveled at full speed. As accident data mounted, attitudes changed. Studies showed seat belts dramatically reduced fatalities. Laws followed. By the 1990s, mandatory seatbelt use became standard across the United States. Child safety seats existed in the 1970s, but they were rarely regulated or tested. Many parents relied on standard seat belts or simply held children on their laps. A 1985 study revealed a devastating truth. Car accidents were the leading cause of death for children aged 1 to 4. This revelation changed everything. Today, child safety seats must meet strict crash test standards, saving countless lives. In the early 1970s, America found itself at a cultural crossroads. The Vietnam War was still casting long shadows. Social movements were reshaping long-held beliefs, and young people were demanding recognition, responsibility, and autonomy. Against this backdrop, a powerful question emerged. If you are old enough to vote, to be drafted, and to fight for your country, shouldn't you also be trusted to drink? When the 26th Amendment was ratified in 1971, lowering the voting age from 21 to 18, many states quickly followed by lowering the legal drinking age as well. At the time, this decision felt logical, fair, and even progressive. Society believed that adulthood began earlier, and with it came adult privileges. Seeing 18-year-olds legally buying beer, wine, and liquor was no cause for alarm. College campuses embraced the change, and bars near universities flourished. Alcohol was woven seamlessly into social life, celebrations, and rites of passage. For many young people, drinking legally became a symbol of independence and maturity.
However, the consequences of this shift soon became impossible to ignore.
Statistics revealed a troubling reality.
Drunk driving accidents involving young drivers surged dramatically. Highways became more dangerous, particularly on weekends and holidays.
Families began losing children not to war, but to preventable traffic accidents fueled by alcohol. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, public opinion began to change. Advocacy groups, researchers, and grieving parents spoke out, arguing that the cost of this freedom was far too high.
Studies showed that alcohol was involved in more than 60% of fatal traffic accidents among young drivers. In response, the federal government took decisive action.
In 1984, the National Minimum Drinking Age Act was passed, effectively forcing states to raise the drinking age back to 21 by threatening to withhold federal highway funding from those that refused. By 1988, all 50 states had complied.
The decision was controversial and remains debated even today. Some view it as an infringement on personal freedom, while others credit it with saving tens of thousands of lives.
Regardless of opinion, it marked a profound shift in how society balanced individual liberty against collective safety. What was once considered a reasonable trust in young adulthood became a cautionary lesson written in statistics, memorials, and roadside crosses. In the 1970s, childhood looked very different for many families, especially those in rural areas. Low-income households or family-run businesses. Although child labor laws had existed for decades, enforcement was uneven and exceptions were plentiful. For many parents, having children work from a young age was not seen as exploitation, but as preparation for life.
Work was believed to build discipline, responsibility, and respect.
Children helped on farms, stocked shelves in small stores, worked in fields, or assisted in workshops and factories.
In agricultural communities, it was common to see children operating heavy machinery, handling livestock, or working long hours during harvest seasons. In family businesses, children were often unpaid helpers, expected to contribute simply because they were part of the household.
At the time, these practices were rarely questioned.
Economic necessity often outweighed concerns about safety or education.
Many families depended on the extra hands, and children themselves took pride in contributing.
However, as society progressed, awareness grew about the physical, emotional, and educational toll such labor could take on young people.
Reports of injuries involving hazardous equipment, exposure to chemicals, and excessive working hours began to draw attention.
By the late 1970s and 1982, attitudes began shifting.
Policymakers recognized that childhood should prioritize education, health, and development rather than economic contribution. Regulations were tightened under the Fair Labor Standards Act, limiting the types of work children could perform and the number of hours they were allowed to work.
Internationally, the conversation expanded even further.
In 1989, the United Nations adopted the Convention on the Rights of the Child, reinforcing the idea that children deserved protection, education, and a safe environment above all else.
Today, child labor in hazardous conditions is strictly prohibited in the United States. While debates about responsibility and work ethic remain, society largely agrees that protecting children from exploitation is not just a moral obligation, but a foundational principle.
In the 1970s, owning an exotic animal was less a legal process and more a personal choice. Pet stores sold iguanas, monkeys, snakes, large birds, and even wild cats with little to no regulation.
Buyers rarely needed permits, proof of knowledge, or documentation of the animal's origin.
For many, owning an exotic pet was a statement of individuality and fascination with the wild. These animals were symbols of adventure, status, and curiosity. Few people considered the long-term implications, both for the animals and the communities around them.
As the exotic pet trade expanded, problems quickly followed. Animals escaped or were abandoned when owners realized they were unprepared to care for them. Some became invasive species, disrupting local ecosystems. Others posed serious risks to public safety. Concerns about animal welfare also grew. Many exotic pets suffered from improper diets, inadequate habitats, and lack of veterinary care.
What once seemed like freedom began to look like neglect.
In response, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service introduced stricter regulations in the 1980s.
By the late 1990s and early 2000s, most states required permits, inspections,
or outright bans on certain species. Today, owning an exotic pet is heavily regulated, reflecting a deeper understanding of ecological responsibility and animal rights, lessons learned from decades of unregulated enthusiasm. Red dye number 2 was once everywhere. Candies, cereals, beverages, and processed foods relied on its vibrant color to attract consumers, especially children. It symbolized the bright artificial optimism of post-war American food culture. In the mid-1970s, studies raised concerns about potential health risks associated with the dye. Although scientific evidence was not definitive, public anxiety spread quickly. Parents worried about their children. Media headlines amplified fear. The response was swift. In 1976, the US government banned red dye number 2 entirely. Interestingly, some companies took action even when they were not directly affected. M&M's famously removed red candies from their lineup, despite never using red dye number 2, simply to avoid alarming consumers. This episode demonstrated how powerful public perception could be in shaping regulation and corporate behavior, a pattern that continues today. Cyclamates were once celebrated as a miracle ingredient, calorie-free, inexpensive, and far sweeter than sugar. Diet sodas and sugar-free products exploded in popularity during the 1960s and 70s, fueled by growing interest in weight control. In 1969, studies suggested that extremely high doses of cyclamates caused bladder tumors in laboratory mice. Although the doses far exceeded normal human consumption, fear spread rapidly. The US government acted decisively, banning cyclamates in 1969 and removing them from the market by 1970. What makes this story particularly fascinating is that many other countries, including Canada and much of Europe, never banned cyclamates and still allow their use today. This difference highlights how food safety regulations often reflect cultural attitudes toward risk as much as scientific evidence. In the 1970s, leaded gasoline powered nearly every car on American roads. It improved engine performance and was considered a technological success. The smell of exhaust was simply part of city life. What was not understood by the public was the long-term impact of releasing lead particles into the air. As research advanced, scientists linked lead exposure to neurological damage, particularly in children, causing learning disabilities, behavioral problems, and reduced IQ. These findings triggered one of the most important environmental reforms in modern history. Beginning in the mid-1970s, the US gradually phased out leaded gasoline. By the 1990s, it had nearly disappeared, leading to measurable improvements in public health and cognitive development across generations. Leaded paint was prized for its durability and vibrant color. Homes, schools, toys, and playground equipment were coated in it, often unknowingly exposing children to toxic dust. As awareness grew, the hidden danger became impossible to ignore. Children ingesting paint chips or inhaling dust suffered severe health consequences. In 1978, lead-based paint was banned in residential properties. However, millions of older homes still contain it today, making safe renovation practices essential. Flame retardants were introduced with good intentions to prevent fires and save lives. They were added to furniture, clothing, and children's sleepwear. Over time, studies revealed these chemicals could disrupt hormones, affect development, and increase cancer risk. By the 2000s, many were banned or restricted, though their legacy remains in older products still in use. Raw milk was once celebrated as pure and natural. Families trusted local farmers and believed pasteurization removed essential nutrients. However, outbreaks of serious illnesses linked to bacteria like E. coli and Salmonella changed the narrative. In 1987, the FDA mandated pasteurization for interstate sales. Today, raw milk remains controversial, legal in some states under strict conditions, banned in others, symbolizing the ongoing tension between freedom of choice and public safety. Candy cigarettes were once a harmless treat, designed to look exactly like real cigarettes. They allowed children to imitate adults in playful ways. As awareness of smoking's dangers grew, concerns arose that these candies normalized smoking behavior. Gradually, they disappeared or were rebranded as candy sticks.
What once felt innocent became unacceptable, a quiet reflection of changing values. The 1970s were vibrant, daring, and full of life, but also dangerously unaware.
What was once normal is now shocking. What we protect today was learned through loss.
So tell us, which of these changes do you think was most necessary?
And is there anything from the 1970s you believe should never have been banned? Share your memories below. And if this journey through memory media lane resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us again as we continue uncovering the past, one forgotten story at a time.